Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, friends. Good evening, wherever you are in the world and Europe, because this is the evening sessions for the EU versus virus hackathon. But actually, it's not the hackathon anymore, is it?
It's a matchathon coming up now. It started already. We just had the opening ceremony one hour ago, and they're starting to bring their idea into the product. That's what the matchathon is all about. But we have with us some amazing guests now today, Matt, to talk about the future of startups and investment landscape.
We've had a lot of great chats on these shows, these evening and morning sessions and day sessions, to be honest. We've been bringing you these quite regularly over the last few weeks. But tonight is an interesting one because we brought on the VCs, the media side of things, the startup advisors, the angel investors, basically the full spectrum of that startup investment cycle to comment on what they think might be coming in the future, what they're seeing now, and what we can hopefully have look forward to as well. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So let's just get started. And before we get started, drop a comment below. Of course, like, what are your thoughts on future society for the landscape of startups and investment?
What do you think is coming? I'm curious as well. I mean, I've been a VC and an angel investor, and you know, I have my comments and my thoughts. Some people are bullish, some people are bearish. But if you have a question for an angel or a VC, write them in the comments right now, because bear in mind, people rewatch these videos at later stages. So make sure to tag your team if you have a startup or you are part of a team that are looking to fundraise, because we're going to make sure that the VCs that were involved in the demo day, that was just 2 days ago, you can watch that in the video library. It's just 3 videos ago, I think it was. And they were all looking at interesting cases that were part of the hackathon.
Now to our first guest, which I'm very excited of. It's John Thornhill, which is the innovation editor at Financial Times, but also the founder of Sifted. So John, why don't we start with how do you see the crisis affect the technology today, and also besides the obvious facts as well?
Well, great to be here with you all this evening. So thank you for the invitation. I think that this crisis is going to act as a massive accelerant of the future. I think that what we're seeing played out already is just going to accelerate. And in particular, I think the best kind of 5-word summary of the state of the world was what Mark Andreessen said some while ago, that software is eating the world. I think the world is becoming digitized, we're moving online, and we're seeing a massive acceleration of that as a result of the crisis. We're moving to a more dematerialized world, what Diane Cole has called the weightless economy. And I think the best example of that is if you look at Zoom. We're all spending half our lives on Zoom at the moment. And you look at the market value of Zoom, it's about $48 billion last time I looked, which is more than the 7 biggest airlines in the world, for obvious reasons. And so I think this is an amazing opportunity we're seeing in a way for startups. And I should explain that Sifted is an FT-backed startup in the media space that we launched last year. And we're writing about all this world, all the extraordinary things that are going on across Europe, because we believe this is a really interesting moment for European tech. And we're fascinated and very excited by all the things that you guys are doing.
Thank you for that. And actually, Sifted is an interesting. We had one of your colleagues, your chief it was an intelligence officer.
Yes, chief intelligence
Chris,
officer.
We had him on the show just a few days ago, and he shared some interesting insight around you know, what he was seeing and what he sees coming. But John, you're in London. Quick one: how is London lockdown?
Well, it's extraordinarily quiet, which is quite pleasant in many ways. I mean, I think it's a very unnerving experience for everyone. I mean, I think people are terrified by what has happened about the pandemic and the tragic loss of life that's been involved. They're very uncertain about the economic future as well. But I think there is a sense also that there is an opening up of possibilities. We're beginning to have a debate about the way the world is changing. And I think there's a very interesting debate going on at the moment about how to build back better, is this kind of slogan of the moment. How can we make sure that the future world is better than what we've had before?
You touched on an interesting topic there, John, about sort of, you know, breaking things down and building them back up, which is very much what we've been doing and what the European Commission and all the organizers with this EU versus virus hack. Now, this is not the first hack, is by no means the initiator. I think that was Garage 48 in Tallinn, the startup ecosystem, the most digital startup ecosystem in Europe, actually, with e-residency and their startup visas and things. But so we're building back from the beginning. these hackathons, they're very much sort of the new startup buzzword, right? You know, every year or every quarter, there's a startup buzzword. You know, back in the day, it was big data, then fintech came in, prop tech. Now we're looking at this hack tech. What's your opinion on these hackathons? Are they good or are they bad, or is it just another buzzword?
Well, I think in a way that we've had three crises in this century. The first one was the kind of 2001 and 9/11. We then had the financial crisis. And I think we've now got this pandemic crisis, and all of them in a way have kind of shattered a lot of our faith in institutions of the market economy and government. And I think that the next step is to engage civil society, to engage this whole army of phenomenally bright people who are in the world, who want to make a difference and to make a positive contribution. I think that's what excites me at the moment, the ability to mobilize all of this kind of global hive mind of what's going on. And hackathons are, I think, a wonderful way of doing that. So, you know, I mean, every 1,000-mile journey, as the Chinese say, begins with a single step. It might seem that a lot of these issues that we're facing and people are trying to deal with are very small at the moment. But I just remind you about what happened to Wikipedia, which I think is an extraordinary example of collective intelligence. They now published, they have 285 languages in which you can read on Wikipedia. There are about 6 million articles on the English language version alone. So I think it's a great example of how this kind of wiki mentality, this ability to embrace a collective intelligence is an incredibly powerful tool. So I'm fascinated by what comes out of all these hackathons and what you're doing.
Thanks, John. You hit the nail on the head there, because what we just heard earlier, actually, in the opening ceremony from the commissioners were, we've had these cluster hackathons, right? Tallinn first, and I think it was Helsinki, then Oslo, actually. Ud and I managed that one as well. We ran the live performances and shows for that. Then Italy, Sweden, everyone was jumped on the bandwagon. But then now as you've mentioned, we've had this organization, the European Commission, to sort of pull them together and get this in collective intelligence, learning how to hack better each time, but also pulling in the authorities, the governing authorities, the public, private, you name it. So that's been a key differentiator. Now, John, we're going to just move on, and we're going to come back to you in just a moment, because I would love to ask you, and I'm going to ask all our guests tonight this question. You're lucky you have the most time to think about it, because you're first. What are you bullish and what are you bearish about right now? It can be a one-word answer, it can be a sentence or so, but we're going to finish at the end of this conversation. So something for everyone to stick around to, because that's one I'm looking forward to hearing from too. What are you bullish and what are you bearish about, tech-wise, of course? Thank you, John.
And now we have with us Vera Futorjanski. Vera Futorjanski coming into us from Dubai. We actually have a mutual friend. So I'm pretty starstruck of that. Yeah. So it's pretty cool. But you are a part of Lead Ventures, but you also have been part of 500 Startups and the Future Foundation in Dubai. And I'm quite curious about how is the startup scene in Dubai these days?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Aria and Matt. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to all listeners who are listening in. Well, Dubai, I think the ecosystem here is very similar to globally. You know, everything moved into digital. We are, I mean, this is a difficult time, but I strongly believe that it's the startups who are the creative force who will build this new normality. And I'm saying new normality because I think we're going to be going to the old normal, which is good. We're building this new anti-fragile, resilient normal, which also requires a lot of empathy. It will be grounded in empathy, and I think that's really great. I want to, well, the startups here, and I'll touch on your point shortly, but I want to mention that not to belittle this crisis, but I think this is a great opportunity that I see not just in the MENA region, but globally. And John alluded to it just now as well. We had several crises already, right? So the .com bubble was the birth of you know, Google and Amazon. Then we had the financial crisis, which was not only the impetus for the decentralized systems, but also for the most used startups, apps we have nowadays, like Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, etc. And I'm really hopeful for this crisis, not just, you know, in the ecosystem I'm in, and I'm seeing like our mutual friends, I was doing great stuff, but also others who are doing, you know, amazing things in telemedicine, education, mental health, and we can touch upon that maybe later a bit more. But I see globally that I think this will be a birth for some really amazing new startups that, you know, solutions that we can't even think yet right now for education or telemedicine. So very
I want to jump in there, Vera, because you've said something that there's a red thread we've heard, and it's a prediction that I didn't coin, but it's something I keep hearing, and I want to emphasize that. As you mentioned, there was a baby boom after the war. Now we're talking about a business boom after this crisis. We're not, we're right at the beginning of this crisis. Touch wood, we'll be out of it sooner than we think, but we're very much at the beginning of a potential financial crisis. So if all remaining equal, ceteris paribus, moving forward, what is the future for the startup industry? Do you believe that there'll be a business boom at the tail end of this crisis?
Matt, I really do. I listened to the FT, and great job on that, John. A couple of weeks ago, I had this FT Global Boardroom seminar, which was an amazing event. And there I heard somebody saying that I think 15 million European jobs at risk, which is a fourth of all the jobs we have in Europe right now. A fourth, like a quarter of all jobs. It's just absolutely insane to even think about. And the ones most vulnerable are the young people, right? Because it's the jobs like waiters and bartenders, etc. And it's we've all been there when we were young, to work at a bar, So before, and I'm sure we all had those kind of small jobs that young people take after graduating, and now they won't be there anymore. So I do think, Matt, to answer your question, this will be a big business boom, just because constraints foster creativity. It's in the times of uncertainty that you become creative, just because you have to, you don't really have a choice. So I do think there will be a big business boom, or rather startup entrepreneurship boom coming out of this.
So how can we make sure that they will survive? What did they need to survive in the long term?
Because actually, I'm going to add to that, because there's a little narrative again with John's conversation about building back from the beginning, right? Because if there's a business boom now, and just to follow up to your question, is it an opportunity for us to, the startup rhetoric is that, 99 out of 100 fail, right? Or there's only that small percentage that actually succeed. Can we engineer the infrastructure around these new businesses to reduce that failure rate?
Well, I think what's really important is to build something that people really need. And I know it sounds so simple, but often with that, people think of all those amazing solutions that could be super creative, but just solve the existing issues on the ground right now. And I think that's the most important. What are the issues right now? Try to solve those, or solve the issues that we will be having after we kind of go back to this, new normal. I think that's really important, right? And adapt to the new normal. There's this analogy, and I brought this in a couple of other webinars I spoke about, but I think, for the listeners, because they are mostly startups, I think it will be interesting to hear. So there's this movie about a guy who falls in a canyon, and a stone falls on his arm, and he can't move. So the only thing he can do is take on his own knife and cut off his own arm in order to survive. This, decisiveness, making hard decisions of cutting off certain potential, verticals of your business is much needed right now in order to survive. You have to pivot if what you're doing right now is not working.
Vera, thank you so much. We'll get back to you in a short amount of time.
And remember those two questions. What are you bullish and what are you bearish about? What are you positive and what are you negative about in the industry today? We'll come back to you right at the end. Thank you, Vera.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yes.
I already have the answer, but I'll wait.
Good.
Next up, Marco Marinucci. You are a startup advisor, founder and CEO of Mind the Bridge. And my first question to you is, what kind of advice do you give the startups these days that you are advising, coming from an angel investor perspective?
Hey, Marco.
Are you there, Marco?
Yes.
I've unmuted you. There you are.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, so I was saying good morning, everybody here, because I'm in Silicon Valley. Good afternoon to you guys there, or good evening for, the ones of you actually are at cocktail time. So, yes, I run a company called Mind the Bridge. We've been operating as a bridge between corporates and startups for quite some time, in fact, for 13 years now. So that's what we do as a core. And so we also advise startups, but really at the bridge with the corporates and different industries there.
And in terms of what you're advising these startups right now, so you're a startup advisor, and what advice are you giving them? If I were a founder in your portfolio right now and say, Marco, what do I do, mate? What would you tell me?
So listen, so we are, I think all of us here, we're in the business of turning challenge into an opportunity, right? So we'll agree with that. On the other side, I think this is a time where scarcity makes us hyper-focused. So Vera also alluded to that. There is no silver bullet. You probably have seen some of the also emails that make the rounds from Sequoia and the the usual suspects here on Sand Hill Road. So I don't think there is a silver bullet. It's time to be focused, to be clearly more frugal, and at the end of the day, I think the world of the fittest. So again, is an opportunity of filtering things that over time actually got a distraction and go back to our core.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. So what are your take on the new normal for startups? Like after this summer, how is the landscape going to look like?
Hard to tell what is the new normal for startups. I mean, probably the major question I would ask, what is the new normal for all of us? And so that's a wider question. Maybe we can, go back to that question at the end that you posed. I'm taking this as this is a hard reset, right? It's not a control alt delete. It's really pulling the plug out of the system. And so I think we should see that as a great opportunity to really rethink at the system as a whole. So, not even just entrepreneurship, but at really the world that we're living at now. And I think at the end of the day could be, again, an opportunity to go 2 steps backward because we definitely have moved 2 steps backwards, but to advance 3 steps forwards. And I think one of the topics that I'm particularly bullish about and excited about, how to turn this crisis into an opportunity to build a more long-term sustainability in general to our world. And so that involves, clearly starts as an opportunity, business opportunities, the role of government. And overall, I think that fits well also with what the European Commission has been pushing for. So the Green Deal and everything that is under the umbrella of building a sustainable environment, I think that's our great opportunity that would have been so accelerated had we not been in a situation like this. So to me, that's really part of also the opportunities of what companies and innovators can build today with a open ocean, blue ocean.
And Marco, some of the obvious casualties in this right now are, I think there was a report done by Slush, the large event in Helsinki, 25,000 participants, which has been cancelled this year. Yeah. They cancelled. I think they might release some virtual element, but they've said that, startups are obviously, a lot of startups in their study are going to run out of money by September. That's sort of the date now. The runways have been extended as far as they come, and September seems to be D-Day really for a lot of startups. And no, not demo day as they used to. Angel investors, right? We've seen a lot of private individuals. Obviously, due diligence periods are becoming more lax. Now, we've noticed that in Norway, some angels, kind of well-to-do, experienced angels, have gone into the market, created small syndicates with small amounts of money to effectively create this distressed asset investing new angel class, which is something brand new. Going to startups that actually have, IP in their product, whatever it might be. But obviously, they can't sell, they can't go to market, they can't afford salespeople right now, for example. So going to these individuals. But what that's taken to do is the angels lowering their threshold of expectation from the founders. Have you seen that in the Valley? Because obviously you're based in Silicon Valley right now. And are angels reacting in a way that we could learn from? Or maybe this group here could, teach some of the angels over there. Who knows?
Yeah, I think we're in a very global world today overall, and so most of these trends tend to be global. In the macro, here in Silicon Valley, we've been living in a pretty significant bubble for quite some time, right? So it's been years we were looking at what's going to be a downturn, a potential slowdown, and some of that actually turned into over evaluations, flood of money. So honestly, there is a certain positive effect to this, a little bit of cleaning. On the other side, there's still plenty of capital been sitting there. I was looking at some statistics. This is more for larger funds, but both Crunchbase and PitchBook were agreeing that still there's a lot of powder that is dry powder that has been sitting there. I think the last semester of last year, of 2019, at a record 120 plus billion of raise of capital from this. So there is plenty sitting there. I think what is going to happen definitely is going to take a little longer, probably, to close your deals. Evaluations are clearly going down, especially in areas like this one. They were overexcited.
A bit of a righting of the ship in a way, right? You know, we have been in a bubble. We, you know, if you look at the investment figures over the last half decade or so, and especially in Europe, with interest from VC funds on the West Coast where you're based, for example, Index Ventures, who we're going to come to at the end of this call, raising new funds, Boulderton, a lot of the large European players bringing in partners from the US. So there's a lot of interest and a lot of eyes on Europe right now. And there's the age-old rhetoric that in the Valley, you're looking at a, you know, 1.5 to 3 times on the valuation at, you know, any seed to Series A round, right, out of Europe. But we've noticed that already around us here, the righting of the ship, valuations becoming a little bit more justifiable, let's put it that way. So I think that's something we're going to see going forward, taking from what you said, Marco. Marco, again, we're going to come back to the end of this. Have a think about what you're bullish and bearish about, my friend. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. All right.
Francisco, next up, is founder and president of Axon Partners Group. You are coming in from Madrid, joining us today. And my first question to you is, how's the startup scene in Madrid or Spain?
Well, I think that the situation in Spain and in some countries is different one from the other. I think that, I mean, talking about what's going to be the aftermath of this crisis, it really depends on which country, and in the startup sector, which sectors as well. Some sectors are going to be affected negatively and others very positive. In Spain, I mean, bear in mind that Axon, we invest globally, so we have 3 funds for Southern Europe, but we have 7 funds in total. And we as well do have a fund program, so we're investing in a lot of VCs worldwide. And what I see is that it really depends a lot on which country and which kind of startup. A lot of companies have to be reinventing themselves, and others, they just have to push the accelerator because the opportunity that is opening for some companies, for example, in the digital space or in the healthcare sector, are massive right now. And they just have to push harder instead of changing or pivoting. And other companies, well, will disappear just because the model is going to change completely. Here, if we talk about Spain itself, I think it's going to be one of the countries most affected by this crisis because of the service and tourism.
Francisco, you touched on a sectorial element there as well. You know, obviously healthcare and the medical industries have, and we've needed them to have a fast forward accelerated growth, startups that are especially on the front line of fighting COVID, right? In terms of pandemic release, progression of disease. That's what these accelerators very much have had at the core of what they've done. But there are a lot of periphery industries. So outside of healthcare and medical industries, are there any industries that you are well versed in that are seeing an uptick?
Well, we see, for example, we are seeing a lot of progress, of course, in any company that has to do with cloud computing, AI, and at the end of the day, using data to improve services for every one of us. And that, I think, is not going to change. Deep tech in general is going to continue being very interesting. Whereas, for example, all these services around, shared economy are going to suffer a lot. And we have seen a lot of money going to those kind of deals, which are going to be having a problem right now. And in the healthcare sector, it's not only about drugs, the drug discovery, or about diseases. One of our best companies right now is providing online medical support to patients. So it's a digital company, really, and it's really right now it's exploding in the country. So it really depends a lot on which country and again which sector. Yeah.
Because we like the. Oh, we have some feedback there. Everyone okay? Yeah, we're good now. like the disease, we're talking about a second phase now. But, in Oslo, Norway, where we're based, and in many countries in Europe, unlike London, which is still in lockdown, and in the US, we're starting to, people are being let out. Bars are opening even. They're limited, and you have to be, within over a meter away from one another. But they're opening up, right? Things are opening up for business. This is the second wave, right? They're talking about that. But we're also seeing that right now, we're still in the midst of the pandemic globally. And those businesses that are first responders are benefiting, healthcare, et cetera, and those around that. But second phase, third phase, so talking end of the year, 2021, we might be in a recession. we're talking about societal changes. John alluded to the fact that, you know, things are going to be very different, starting to build from the beginning again. Have you adjusted your investment process, thinking about second phase, third phase into 2021, 2023, for example?
Well, I mean, maybe because we were lucky, we had already started to get away from consumer models and go more into B2B, for example, and life sciences since some time ago. So we are not really changing a lot. I think and most of our portfolio, we made an assessment very recently, and I think it was more than 75% of the portfolio is going to improve actually, rather than get worse after this crisis. So I personally haven't done any particular adjustment to our investment thesis. We are just accelerating, as I was saying before, because I think the opportunity is going to be much, much bigger for the people who have money and especially have deal flow and capability to deploy it, you know, globally. I think that's what really matters right now.
Nice one. Francesco, thank you so much for that. We're going to come back to you at the end. Remember those two questions. What are you bullish and what are you bearish about? And, you know, just to add to your point there about these sectoral focuses. And I remember when I was a VC in London, you know, it was in the rocket internet days of Berlin, you know, the e-commerce industry was the, you know, poster child of technology globally. E-commerce has come back with a vengeance, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, e-commerce has never been more relevant. Ordering things online, that is what e-commerce is. For those of you who don't know at home, e-commerce, online commerce. So Dominic, Francesco, thank you so much. We're going to head over to Dominic, who is from Index Ventures. You will probably know the name. They're one of the leading VCs in Europe. They have a US focus too. Dominic, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here with everybody.
Dominic, your focus at Index, you are the VP of Insight, VP of Talent. On the Insight angle, give us some insight about what your thoughts on from Index perspective to the climate we're in right now.
Well, I mean, we've seen, I think a lot of the speakers already touched on the sort of mixed impact that the pandemic has had on portfolio companies, and that's really driven by the impact on the wider world. So, yeah, I think I'd probably add in terms of, well, if you actually, sorry, I'm going to sort of reset. If you sort of just move on to the next thing. Sorry.
No worries. No, so okay. One thing we keep getting asked about as well is thinking around, you know, is it a good time to start a company? We talk about this business boom, people losing their jobs. If they've got some money saved up, maybe they can bootstrap for a little bit. But is it a good time to start a company?
Or join one?
I mean, I think, you know, Vera said earlier, you know, made the really good point that a lot of the world's, you know, greatest tech companies have been born out of crisis, and the financial crisis really did give rise to a lot of the names that we're so familiar with now. You know, the Airbnbs, Ubers, Squares, Pinterest, etc. So yeah, it is a great time. You know, it has proven to be a great time, despite what you might generally think. You know, what common sense might say, no, it's a crazy time. But in fact, it has been proven to be a great time. And it is that, you know, sort of greatness comes out of adversity piece. It is also because of, you know, the creative destruction that comes out of a crisis, particularly in terms of talent. It leads to people finding themselves in positions they hadn't expected to, and people who perhaps, you know, been doing some really good work, but hadn't been pushing the envelope as much as they were capable of. And suddenly in adversity, they find they've got amazing skills or amazing visions, and you know, the needs must and the opportunity must, and that has been proven to sort of give rise to amazing things. I would also say, you know, this isn't just at the sort of top end of, like, you know, Airbnb or, you know, or bust. It's I like somebody who's a very close friend of mine, Saul Klein, who's well known in the European ecosystem as well, coined the phrase, you know, remember, for every unicorn, there's 1,000 zebras. Yeah, and actually, like, small businesses and founding the opportunities for building small businesses, they don't all have to become the next, you know, unicorns to be really beneficial to society. And there's a great flywheel between those as well, because, you know, the platforms such as Airbnb, etc., you know, give rise to, you know, hundreds of unicorn businesses in their wake. So there's that great flywheel. And increasingly, I think there's a lot of European tech in particular is focused on opportunities in SMBs. and servicing SMBs. So I think there's a great flywheel there.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was a person who I lost my job and I was thinking about starting a startup, for example, like what is the sector you would advise me to look into and start? Where to start?
I mean, look, let's not. Yeah, it's all very, very good to say, you know, out of adversity comes greatness, etc., and great time to start a business. It's obviously a very, very difficult time for, you know, the majority of people out there, and you know, let's not be in our bubble or in our communities so much. It's a bloody tough world. I'm looking at the stats. Even in our portfolio and in the tech sector has been more insulated than many others. But in our portfolio, I have an aggregation of all the job openings across our portfolio, and that's fallen from, you know, number of advertised vacancies across our portfolio has fallen from, was nearly 5,000 before the crisis hit. It's now just over 2,000. That's like a 60% drop in the hiring. And when I drill down into that, you know, it's by the type of roles, right? So hiring in sort of tech roles, engineering and product type of roles is down about sort of 30 to 40%. Go-to-market roles, you know, more like 85, 90%. Recruiting roles, almost 100%. You know, it's it does tell a story. So it does depend what your skill set is, where you're coming from. I think it's really difficult. Go-to-market roles, you know, companies are putting on hold. It's not that hiring isn't going to happen, but there is a lot of hiring freezes and putting on hold, keeping control of your cash, extending your runway, etc. So there's, you know, we have to be cognizant of that backdrop here. But I think actually, if you've got technical skills, if you're a software developer, there's still a hell of a lot out there, and there's a lot of sector switches. So there are, you know, I know you're asking about the bullish bearish, and I don't want to jump the gun, but there are a lot of sectors which are really being benefited as well during this crisis, and that creative destruction and switch of talent moving and capital moving from between sectors is happening as we speak.
We saw that in Copenhagen, actually, Dominic. Neil Murray, who's a British guy based in Copenhagen, founder of the Nordic Web. We know Neil, we love Neil. He set up an initiative, or he's part of an initiative at least, which was to help startups such as you mentioned that are, you know, releasing staff, relieving staff, furloughing or permittert, as we have in Norway here, and allowing that to circle back into the economy of the startup scene. Mentioning the bubble, yes, we are in a bubble, we're insulated, but also trying to keep that insulation to help people within that bubble instead of just the good times. The bad times also, we feed back some of those tech talent into that ecosystem. Now, Dominic, thank you so much for those comments. Really interesting to hear that maybe, Elliot, what Dominic was saying there, what I heard was, instead of starting a startup, maybe we should learn to be a developer.
Exactly.
Learn to code.
I the same. Yeah.
I can't code. Maybe it's the time to, yeah. Fortunately, online streaming is taken off, so we're doing,
luckily.
It's taboo to say you're doing all right, but you know, this is all going okay. Dominic, we're going to come back to you in just a minute, mate, to hear the bullish and bearish comments from what you think should happen. So should we jump over to our first speaker of this evening? John, should we go back to you, mate? Back in London, John Thornhill.
Right, so you want my bullish case?
Bullish and bearish, yeah.
All right, so bullish is social impact unicorns. It's something that the Norsken Foundation next door to you in Sweden, I first heard the phrase from them, and I think it's a great one. It means a unicorn, instead of having $1 billion evaluation, it's you impact 1 billion people's lives in a positive way. Wow. That's in education or healthcare, anything else. I think we're going to find one in Europe in the next 2 years.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And bearish?
Bearish, I think mass unemployment leading to intergenerational strife.
That was fundamental though. But John, thank you so much, John, for joining us. Sifted, check it out if you haven't already. Sifted.eu, is it?
It is, yeah.
Sifted.eu. They have a great newsletter that I actually love to read every other morning. 3 times a week now, is it, John?
It is indeed. Yeah. Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
No worries. Thank you. Check it out, Sifted. Take care, John.
Vera, next up.
So I agree with John. I think, creating impact is really key. And we can do that, by obviously having the return on investment as well, but influencing, people. And you can do that with telemedicine by giving access to people, in India or Nigeria, remote villages, to be able to access a doctor, education, which I'm also really bullish on, because you can give it to anybody, and especially so many girls, as we know, go without education. So for them to have access to education online is key. And being in this region, I'm really bullish on food tech. You know, in Dubai, we import 85% of our food. Now, knowing how quickly supply chains can break, right? Not lucky, we never had a shortage of anything. The government has managed this really so well. But I do think, you know, we need to become so much more self-sufficient here in the region. So food tech is something I'm really bullish about. And by the way, Matt, you mentioned Rocket Internet. I actually started my entrepreneurial career with Rocket Internet in Berlin.
Did you? So many great people have. I mean, the Rocket Mafia isn't a joke. You know, we talk about startups that have created unicorn founders, and Rocket is very much one of them. Less active now, but I'm dealing with a lot of friends who have been part of those initiatives all around the world. So yeah, great to hear.
Good network. And on the kind of, you know, the negative effect I see, I think besides the pandemic and the economic crisis, we see a big mental health crisis. And I think this is something we definitely need to put more attention to. And especially also where I am, we have a bit of a stigma around that, but it's getting better. There are 2 startups that are performing incredibly well in mental health, one in Egypt, one in Saudi. So I think, you know, mental health is something we need to really pay a lot of attention to.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you so much. And Marco, next up is you.
Yes. So I think we're all on the same page here. And so, to the risk of sound a little bit philosophical, but I think this is an opportunity of being more human. We should take that as, I mean, it starts even from the way that we are interacting with each other. Look at us. So we're in the intimacy of our houses. You know, there is less filter, right? So nobody's wearing ties, or ties here in Silicon Valley, but the rest of the world there. So I think that's a great opportunity, and I mean, and to, you know, at the different level of human versus the businesses that we're creating, I think also is a great opportunity to review the metrics, the measurements of development, starting from GDP as the only measure that has been our you know, driving force so far. There's probably way other opportunities to add different measurements, and John alluded to the opportunity of building, and we will see unicorns where, you know, the double and triple bottom line will be looked at. And I think we're not alone here. I mean, yesterday I was having a live interview with the CEO of the 2nd largest energy company in the world, and it was totally in agreement that that's I mean, it's not just the traditional financial measures that are you know, are the ones that we should start looking at. And so I think there's a great opportunity to reset that. On the bearish, I think there are plenty, but especially if you're in the US, I think retail is definitely something that is accelerating a collapse. And so you see, you know, the 1,000 of job loss, and this is something that was already in the trends, but is definitely accelerating by several years. So. Sad to see.
Thank you for that, Marco. And not last up, penultimate, Francesco. What are your bullish and bearish thoughts, my friend?
I am a very bad one at answering to this because I'm a very optimistic person. So it's very hard for me to think about the negative side of things, although I will try. I think I see a lot of good things that are going to come out of this crisis. First of all, this experiment of confining 7,000 million people for a couple of months or more, I think has created a lot of changes in the minds of people. No, I see a lot of people who have enjoyed their families since a long time. A lot of people who are working remotely, like we are doing now with video conferencing, and that's going to change a lot of our work habits, which perhaps we're getting a bit crazy with all this traveling and absurd, you know, flights just for 1 or 2 hour meetings, and a lot of those things are going to change for good, more human, like Marco was saying, and I think that's going to be very good. Unfortunately, that makes some of the industries suffer, and that is going to generate job losses, and perhaps that adjustment will take time, and a lot of people will suffer. But in the long term, I don't think that this is going to be bad at all. And I think the long term is going to be shorter than what we think. It's not going to be so long. That's my feeling.
Thank you, Francisco.
Should we didn't say anything negative, but I'll let you off this time. You're a positive man. We like it. We need positivity right now, Francesco. So let's move over to our dear friend Dominic from Index in London.
Okay, I hope that doesn't mean I have to focus entirely on negatives to counterbalance. I'll try and do an even mix. I think, I mean, on the positive, well, partly sectors and partly general, I think sectors which are going to benefit beyond the ones which have been mentioned, and some of the obvious ones like, you know, remote work, future of work, is more generally things around infrastructure, and I'd highlight cyber as well, right? For two different reasons. Infrastructure, because there's been such a massive shift towards digital working, and companies, huge organizations have in a couple of months suddenly shifted everything to cloud solutions and the remote working, and the infrastructure demands. It's been incredible how the digital economy has responded with so few crashes, so, you know, has risen up in terms of bandwidth and etc. But it is under a lot of strain, and there's going to be a lot of infrastructure requirements going forward. So I think we'll see a lot of that in tech ops, DevOps, as well as pure infra. You know, we've got a super successful business of ours called Datadog, who are originally French founders. It's a DevOps dashboard business. Yeah, it's like sort of doing incredibly well. It's now listed, a listed company worth, I think, $25 billion, I think, at last count. So
nice investment, mate.
Yeah, it was a very nice investment. Thank you. But so I think there are things like that, and I think the general in cyber, there is now a sort of focus on what other sort of what we thought were, you know, black swans have we been missing out on, right? The pandemic hit us when we look back, it was being predicted by Bill Gates and God knows how many others have said this is going to happen, and yet we sort of just turned a blind eye to it. And I think the
Dominic, you're all wrong. You're all wrong. It's about 5G, mate. It's all about the 5G. It's a 5G conspiracy. 5G and the Tiger King. I knew it. I saw it before.
Your Facebook account's about to be blocked.
Yeah, exactly.
I think similarly now, it's like if those two risks were a biological virus and a digital virus, I think there's going to be a lot of boardrooms and a lot of people who are going to be thinking, well, we've really got to get our security up to scratch.
Yeah.
On that side as well, because we were just hit, you know, shot between the eyes without realizing it. So I think sector-wise, yeah, it's for a sort of negative reason, but then on the other hand, maybe that's positive, that we've been too focused on exuberant, never-ending positivity. And there are existential and massive threats that can hit us globally. And we've got to be more cognizant of those and put more of our thinking and our brain power into protecting ourselves against massive downside risks as well. So, I mean, therefore I'm bullish because of something bearish. But on the bearish side, in a very general sense, beyond the sort of obviously what's been said around retail and travel sectors, I would also say I feel quite, this is a personal view, I feel pretty bearish as things stand on global cooperation and global governance. This has not been the world's finest hour for showing intergovernmental cooperation. And that sort of, as we come out of this pandemic and we have to return to thinking about climate change, is going to be a major weakness. So I look forward to tech being able to somehow reconstruct that, but that is a slightly different order of problem, but it does loom large, I think, and it's a bit of an overhang, I think, on the global economy.
Do you think we're going to, I mean, what we've seen with this pandemic is, you know, the hackathon, the collective mindset, collective intelligence that John mentioned earlier as well, coming together, and also from a cross-governmental, cross-nation, cross-borders, borderless world we now have, all of us coming in from different locations. It sounds like, you know, this is when the climate crisis will come, and when it does, we're going to have a hackathon, I guess, to fix it. But will it be too late? You know, seems like where we're going with this. Dominic,
I do think there's a lot of about bottom up, I would say, and I would say some of the greatest leadership we've seen in this crisis has been at municipal and regional level. Has been some incredible, and it has shown us a different way. It's not just top-down directive, you know, president to president stuff. It's about communities and bottom-up action as well.
Thank you so much, Dominic. Thank you to all our guests. I want to sum things up very briefly before we move on. So the things that stood out to me earlier and to you at home were this rebuild, this also retrain mentality that's come out of, not necessarily starting a startup, living in this bubble that we're in, but maybe retraining. If, as Dominic mentioned, some of the areas that are in high demand or the ones that are hiring at least a little are in the technical roles and things like that, and that could be an area for people to look into.
Yeah.
And of course, cyber and infrastructure are sectors that we've heard that as well, Dominic, before, and others from previous streams we've done. Cybersecurity, the cyber attacks have gone up fourfold at this time, because obviously we're spending so much more time online at home. This is an area that needs to have some fast accelerated innovations in it. There are already existing organizations that you can join and be part of to get us through that. So thank you to our guests, to John, to Vera, to Marco, Francisco, and Dominic. Thank you for joining us. When are we coming back, Odia?
9 a.m. tomorrow for a wake-up call, I guess.
9 a.m. tomorrow morning in customary fashion. Have a nice Friday. From Oslo, Norway, my name is Matt C. Smith, and this is... Stay tuned, folks. We're going to be coming back for the Matchathon tomorrow morning, 9 till Sunday at 9 p.m. Tune in anytime. Say hello. Have a nice Friday, everyone. Dance off with us.